Hello, welcome to the 33rd episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this episode, I'll revisit the topic of the coronavirus. If you didn't see the first video, I really encourage you to see the first one because this one is going to address certain different aspects that I couldn't cover or didn't cover in the first video. So, I wanted to do this video because on social networks, more and more, you hear people debating a lot and taking sides, judging. What should have been, what would have been the better response. They turn into epidemiological experts, scientists, doctors, even though they have no idea what they're talking about. That includes just about everyone, even myself, actually. All of us are kind of dragged into this 3D game where we're asked to take sides. And that's fine on a certain level, but I just wanted to take a little bit of a higher view here. So, first, for instance, there's this debate whether chloroquine, I don't even know if that's how you pronounce it, but, anyways, it's one of these very cheap medicines that has been promoted by a French doctor and many other doctors, which is a call that has been very controversial and hotly debated, whether it's real or not real, whether it actually works or not. And then there's the whole pharma business kind of conspiracy theory where they actually want to roll out a very expensive vaccine, whereas chloroquine is a very old one and very easy to produce, very cheap. And so it's always this follow the money kind of argument. And, so you get muddled into all this. Should we all wear masks? It worked for South Korea. And then the obvious question is, why do they have masks? Why don't we have masks? Of course, in countries like Japan or South Korea, it's a common thing actually to wear masks when you're sick. So probably every household already had masks. But everybody's saying, my God, it's a conspiracy. How come our governments are not capable of producing or acquiring or quickly disseminating or dispatching enough masks for everyone? Mass testing, that's also something that South Korea did. And if you look at the results of their exposure or their cases in coronavirus, it's been really stagnating, even dropping. Why aren't we mass testing everyone? Why instead are we in confinement? Isn't this another way to control the citizens, to remove our democratic rights, to push forward some executive powers, like in Hungary, by the way, where now apparently the president can start ruling by decree and doesn't even need an election. So end of democracy and our rights as citizens. Then there's this debate whether it makes sense to sort of halt the entire economy and put everything into meltdown for what, relatively speaking, is not so many deaths. So for the moment, it's about 65,000 deaths for the coronavirus. It could probably go much higher, of course, but then there's 9 million people dying every year of starvation. So, of course, it's not a question of numbers, but everybody's like hotly debating whether this even makes sense. It's going to be very costly in the economy, for the economy, very taxing. And then the whole government action. Why are certain governments seen as being efficient, others not? Some things are hectic. And so here, I wanted to put all of these debates into a broader context. And what I mean by that is that it's impossible to judge the whether one course of action would have been better than another unless you have a sort of a multi-dimensional perspective on all the possible ramifications into the future of every one of those courses of actions and all of these alternative courses of action. And so I'm just going to do a little brainstorm here, which is not about truth. It's just about simulating different scenarios and understanding that um, some things are actually perfect, even though they seem like they're silly or stupid from our limited one-dimensional or linear time perspective. So, for instance, government action, and why have they not been very effective in doing mass testing or providing masks to everyone? Well, maybe, just maybe, we need, and this is really important to understand this, we need to experience certain things in order to move on, to evolve, to change. And so you could say that the government is kind of like many people still look up to the government, they trust the government, they do whatever the government says, trusting it blindly. And perhaps humanity needed this one extra kind of push in governments losing their credibility. So even people that really trust governments are disappointed and disgusted by the way that some of these governments acted in order for them to change, to evolve, to change their habits, to change their way of thinking, to start turning towards other means of action than just trusting government, trying to start taking their fates into their own hands, starting to join some cooperatives, growing local food, or I mean, there's just so many millions of forms again that the experience of not being able to trust your government brings you towards in terms of what you're going to do with it, action, how it translates into action at the individual level. And the sum total of all the individual ways that it is experienced, and then the individual ways in which it is acted upon, might form something sort of a coherence, a hidden coherence, a magic hidden coherence, which edges us along this evolutionary path of humanity, um, growing further, evolving, and all those things. Just like certain, mutations or changes across generations in biology, you don't really see their meaning or their usefulness only retrospectively very often, and so is the case in this situation. Confinement and letting the economy go to the toilet. Well, again, it's the same thing. I mean, perhaps this what is happening to us, that is the coronavirus, is actually the most gentle way that the universe has found to push us for change. Because if you think about it, again, the death toll is relatively small compared to other disasters. It affects everyone. Everyone is affected. Everyone at the end of this story, at the end of this event, will have stories to share of relatives or friends that have been affected in one way or another by the coronavirus. Either nurses that will recount the horrors they've lived through, or a lost loved one. And that global shared experience of, for instance, being confined, having that time to think, to focus within, to look at what is really, to look at your life and see if you're really happy, if what you're doing makes you happy. All that is actually very gentle. If you think of the alternatives, if you take, for instance, for instance, if you take, why is this not working? If you take something like climate change. Now imagine if we have to go all the way towards certain disastrous natural disasters, like a mass rise of the sea level. if we go all the way to that kind of experience, well, there are going to be many people dying, but it will also destroy so much infrastructure. Whereas this coronavirus, there's no destruction of anything. It's more like a pause button that has been put on society. Everything sort of comes to a grinding halt, and yet the fears levels are really high. But ultimately, the factories are still standing. Nothing is really destroyed. Even nature is actually feeling much better. The pollution levels are going down. So it's a very, very gentle kind of push for change. Just like I was comparing it to the birth process, it's like the first contraction, or one of the first contractions, which are, mild. And either the baby goes with the flow or resists, and then the following contractions will be felt much more violently. And so it's actually a very, very gentle form that this took, actually, to try to push us a little bit further down the evolutionary path. And so again, this also gives us the opportunity to completely rethink the financial system, the economy, but without destroying any of the underlying infrastructure or assets of the economy. Unlike, for instance, a massive flooding, which destroys everything. So it's impossible to judge. But at the same time, and this is where you'll see that this video is a bit twisted, what I'm saying here is this information should only be available to those who are ready to hear it. Because while you may be witnessing people debating hotly on Facebook and all social networks and saying, "Wait, don't engage in onto all of this. There's a high perspective." The thing that I'm doing here, basically, don't forget that those people maybe need the experience of losing trust in their government, of fearing for their lives, fearing for their loved ones, of plenty of these experiences for the transformation, for the change that they are going to go through. And they cannot skip the experience part. If you tell them all of this, then it's like it's kind of a spoiler, which means you're kind of disconnected when watching the movie. You don't really focus on what's happening. You don't live it. And then therefore, no integration, no assimilation of the experience, of the sort of morality, or what the end result or conclusion from the experience is. So the reason I'm saying all of this is because I am beyond the need, in this specific case, to have the experience of losing trust in government, because that's something that I've sort of moved beyond. Or I don't need the experience of the debate between evil pharma and genius hippie scientists. I don't need that experience. I don't need to be hotly engaged in that, because that is not the topic that I'm exploring right now in terms of something that I need to balance within myself. So it's always about what you need to live on a personal level within. And so not judging includes not judging the people that are judging and engaging in judgment, and are judging all of these things and are engaging wildly into these debates hotly, and trying to say, you're right, you're wrong, whatever. Even though the entire process from a higher perspective is absolutely perfect and absolutely wonderful. And at all levels, because each country has an experience which is tailored to what their inhabitants need to experience. For instance, Hungary moving from democracy to dictatorship, or the US, where Trump is really on the fence between saving the economy and saving lives. Um, I mean, it's really looking at your shadows, looking at making a choice between what's really important for you, um, choosing between the economy and saving lives of the vulnerable, for instance, and shining a conscious light onto that kind of thing, where before it was unconscious, where before it was localized. It was like, I think the latest scandal that I've heard about is this fracking where entire villages in the US were poisoned, people were dying. Well, that's localized, and and people just kind of saying, well, it's not my village, it's not my city, it's not my problem. Here, it's really no more ignoring of the shadows and the underlying assumptions behind some of our political decisions, economic systems, where indeed the lives are less important than the economy and the profits. And it's not about saying one is better than the other or whatever. It's just about making conscious choices, forcing humanity to make conscious decisions, conscious choices, instead of by default kind of choices, like there's fracking going on. Oh, well, it's not in my city. Somebody else will deal with it. I'm just going to go about going to Starbucks, have a cup of coffee, and, it'll solve itself. Um, or engaging in sort of all out war and lobbying against the frackers, which is just two sides of the same coin. Huh? It's just black or white. And it's neither. A choice is for being for something, not against. Uh, Against is a very poor way to make choices, because being against something is, well, you know how it is in spiritual circles. You actually reinforce that which you fight, because obviously, if you're fighting it, it has to exist in the first place. So by fighting it, you're actually acknowledging that it perpetuates itself and it keeps on existing. And I mean, I'm struggling with all this myself, because if you look at my videos, and I'm saying that this is a birth process and that all of this is nice and perfect, I'm still wishing and hoping that this will be quick and smooth and painless. That's, of course, my 3D wish as a person. And I'm trying to push forward ideas like a reform of the financial system, which will make everything easier for people, where you'll have universal basic income, where, inequalities will be taken care of. All of these things will be all nice and jolly. But that is a very limiting perspective, which contradicts directly this trust that I'm supposed to have in the fact that this process is perfect and is tailored to the level of consciousness of humanity as a whole, not just me, but humanity as a whole, and what humanity needs to experience on an individual and collective level. That is the sum total of all individual experiences. What every person needs to live through in order for the birth process to be really accepted and have the right effects. If it's quick, smooth, and painless as I hope for, maybe the lessons or the experiences that need to be learned and integrated will also be skipped. And so even I have a hard time, don't get me wrong, even I have a hard time to live by um, the insights or the knowing or the things that I hold for being true. It's difficult. It's really difficult, because we're still kind of in an in-between situation, and we're torn between um, what our 3D sort of avatar wants, and what is the best from a very higher perspective. And again, that's totally fine as well. I mean, accepting this with humor, like, I'm only human. I have to accept it. I'm only human. And especially not feeling guilt for failing to live up to these kind of higher insights is the best way to deal with it. Because if you feel guilt, and especially if you feel guilt and you don't want to feel guilt about all of this, then maybe you're going to start pushing this into an unconscious level. That means you'll unconsciously try to go against your own insights. And if it's unconscious, then it has to be brought forth into consciousness via experiences very often, which can be even more painful than just slipping here and there and then realizing it and then saying, oh, oops, maybe I should let go a little bit more and practice trying to letting go and surrendering. And just seeing how you can help with this process, going with the flow, as I was saying, which is what I'm trying to do here, obviously. So I hope you found this video interesting, and I'm really not even sure who's going to listen to this, because there's a kind of a double catch in this, like where the only people that should be seeing this are those that are beyond this already, this whole debating and whatnot. So I don't even know why they would want to see this video or need to see this video. And those that are still hotly debating all this maybe shouldn't see this video, because it's not right and it would prevent them from integrating stuff. So, hey, I'm throwing this out there. Who knows if it's going to be useful for anyone. So happy to hear your comments and your feedback. Just one last thing I wanted to do. I'm starting to consider to do YouTube lives with Q&A, because I'm kind of running out of topics. I mean, I've been doing these videos for a while now, and I mean, I still have a couple of topics that I want to talk about, but ultimately I think it would be nice if I can just interact with some of you guys and respond to questions rather than doing it in the comments sometimes. But if you already have questions, don't hesitate to leave a comment, please, and on this video, so that if I do my live, and then obviously because I don't have that many subscribers, nobody shows up because, for whatever reason, then I still have things to talk about. That'll be less embarrassing. So happy to hear your thoughts, and see you in the next video.